Thank you for coming. I'm really honored to be here. This is the maiden voyage for my research topic to present at conference, so I'm so glad that you could make it. So to dive right in, flotation rest, as she introduced, is restricted environmental stimulation therapy or technique, also known as sensory deprivation and isolation. So what is float tank therapy? Well, float tank therapy involves a process where you undress, you step into a shower, you wash off the day's dirt, and then you emerge or you enter into a hermetically sealed tank. You lay down, it is sightless, soundless, lightless, and you lay back into a saturation of water that is mixed with about 1,000 pounds of magnesium sulfate, dissolved in about 250 gallons of water. The saturation is heated to about skin temperature, which hovers around 93, 94.5 degrees. And it's to mimic, it's to sort of trick us to think that we don't know where our body's in, where the environment begins. The saturated water mimics the Dead Sea in perinatal states. It feels like you're being held in a womb. John Lilly was a medical doctor, a neuropsychologist. He was a maverick among mavericks. He's known for his LSD research and his dolphin research, and he was right there alongside in the 1950s with Stanislaw Grof and Tim Leary, among others. And he gifted us this tank technology, this amazing technology, to do our psycho-spiritual work. Those familiar with alchemy might understand it more as a vas alembic, an alchemical bath, but basically it's a vessel, a container. There are different designs. There are float cabins, there are float pods, and then there are also customized float configurations that can suit any kind of a build-out. Some of these tanks have lights and music inside, but the one where I work actually is traditional sensory deprivation. There's no light, no sound. Let's see. So I want to, this evening, situate us into a mythopoetic imaginal state or sensibility and open with a passage. Adhering to the depth psychological tradition, what we do is we honor the gods by opening and closing our work with a recitation of something to honor the gods. So I want to start with Jeanette Paris. She's a Jungian scholar, an archetypalist, and an exquisite author, and this is from Pagan Meditations. It's about Aphrodite, the worlds of Aphrodite, Hestia, and Artemis. If we believe or fancy that every human being has somewhere buried within their cells not only the memory of his own inner uterine life, but also the unconscious memory of the origin of all life in ocean's depth, and do we not feel, on going to the sea, a sense of return to the origin, to the rhythm of our waves? I love that passage because it reminds me of how intimate and sensual flotation can be for some people. So why do depth psychological research? Well, Eric Craig says that we do depth psychological research to uncover what is hidden, what is invisible, what is secret. Mary Watkins says it helps us to listen into the margins. I find that flotation is like an epistemology of silence. It helps us hear. So today I want to discuss, this lovely evening, I want to discuss the four following things. I want to talk a little bit about flotation phenomenology and the numinous, John Lilly and image, the archetype of the wise old man and other helpful guides, and then I want to unpack just a little bit what we mean by psyche and soul. And I hope that these things will help you to understand what I mean by psyche's bath. So a quick Google search of the popular flotation hashtag, why we float, will uncover a few things. Why do people come for this medicine? People come for this medicine because they're in pain. They want relief from pain, from depression, anxiety, stress, hypertension, migraine headaches. They suffer from insomnia, inflammation, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, burnout disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, type 1 and 2 diabetes. Additionally, people are coming to float because they're spiritual seekers. They're not satisfied. They are on a path of psycho-spiritual transformation. I have the pleasure of working at a boutique flotation establishment in Los Angeles, California. I've been there for a little over a year, and I've had the opportunity to come to know my clients and watch their progress, to witness their journey, and to hear their stories. Some clients tell me that they hear a choir of cats meowing in the tank. That's strange. Other clients have terrifying experiences. They are chased by demonic images in the tank. Nobody wants a devil chasing them, right? Still other reports, I have men whisper into my ear and confess that the tank is the only place that they feel safe to cry. People come in spiritual crisis. They've just received a phone call that a death of a loved one, and they need a place to process their grief. And they float, and when they come out, they'll have an expression on their face. They are bearing witness to something that occurred in the tank. There was an encounter, and they sit and they weep. And I just sort of quietly hold space with them to let them process their grief. So we've heard a lot at this conference about how there are psychological benefits to non-ordinary states of consciousness, such as, obviously, Stanislav Grof's work with holotropic breathwork. In the darkness and the silence of Psyche's bath, we have mystical states, perinatal states, the oceanic feeling. And Psyche's bath invites the numinous. As a symbolic bath, we dissolve and we wash away our psychological dirt. We silence the mind, and we can listen into the margins. There is a sage, a wise man, Dr. Lionel Corbett. He's a psychiatrist, a Jungian analyst, and author of The Religious Function of the Psyche. He tells us that the numinous gives us a personal symbol of the divine, of the sacred, as compared with the collective symbols that are passed down to us through prescription, through doctrinal law, like the cross and the Trinity. The numinous encounters that we can experience, they help us to soothe anxieties by promoting spiritual growth through awareness of a greater reality beyond ordinary life. And so we know in general that the goal of psycho-spiritual work is transformation. And to realize a deeper self with a capital S, and I'll get back to that in a minute, but realizing a deeper self beyond the ordinary ego self, or what Lionel Corbett calls the mego. So now that I've sort of opened this up to float phenomena and invited the numinous, I want to talk about John Lilly a little bit. John Lilly, he had a vision when he was young. He talks about this in The Center of the Cyclone, one of his key texts. He was raised, just to give you a background, he was raised traditional Catholic. He went to parochial schools. And he was describing how he was awaiting confessional one day in a darkened church. Only a couple of candles were lit. Very little light was coming through the windows. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, angels appeared. God on his throne. And saints. There was a glorious tint to the air. The feeling tone, he reported, it felt like he felt God's love, God's caring, and God's creation of all things. There was a sense of enchantment, and in his absolute exuberance, he decided to run and go tell the nuns. Well, the nuns said, no. Only saints hear and see visions. You run along and go back to your basement laboratory and play with your chemistry set and leave the God stuff to the priests. So right then and there, Lilly's experience of the numinous, his personal and sacred connection, it was killed, it was dead on arrival, it was squashed. And he forgot all about it until he started doing, many years later, when he grew up, he started doing his LSD and tank research. So what is image? Well, elder wise man and trickster, Papa Jung, Carl Jung, said that psyche is image. And he reminds us that God speaks chiefly through visions and dreams. The silence and the darkness of the flotation tank, I think it offers us a blank canvas or a film screen for the unconscious psyche to offer us living images. Images, like the psyche, are real and alive. That's the ontological stance that we take, the paradigm, the worldview that we take in our field, is that the psyche is real. So I want to merge into talking about wisdom figures. I'm working with an incredible researcher. Her name is Dr. Annette Kellgren. She is part of a team at the University of Karlstad, Sweden, the Human Performance Lab, and they've been doing robust research on flotation for a number of years. They have actually extended the gap in research that was placed back in the 1980s to combine psychotherapy and flotation therapy. There are incredible benefits when these two modalities are combined and work together. But oddly enough, despite the call being placed in the 80s and still on the books today, the call remains unanswered. But in her research, when she did her doctorate, she had a particular client who experienced in the tank the appearance of a figure who went by the name of Arachnion, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This figure named Arachnion, the participant described him as a bearded, berobed man that wore a white shift and imparted wisdom. So looking at this from a Jungian sensibility and an archetypal sensibility, we might suggest that this is a wise old man figure. Now, the wise old man, it can be a figure that appears to us in a dream, in a vision, like Jung with Philemon, but it also can appear to us as a mana personality, which a mana personality is like a spirit figure. It's an anthropology term. It's a term that comes from anthropology, and it denotes a psychic energy that ties to the magical realm. And we've heard a little bit today with Dean Radin talk about the magical realm. But with a mana personality, it is also embodied. It shows up embodied, and it possesses a special type of charisma that is distinct to this extraordinary world rather than ordinary charisma. In biblical stories, we have Jethro and Moses, but in pop film and culture, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. And again, of course, Philemon, who appeared to Jung and served as an important and critical guide throughout his life. So figures like the wise old man show up as a guide on the path of transformation. And I want to now return to the idea of the archetype of the self, or what do we mean by the self? So the archetype of the self is the organizing principle. Jung said that there is an archetype that stands behind all the other archetypes. And this archetype provides us with what's called the imago Dei, or a God image. It is a personal symbol that becomes part of our understanding of our connection to the numinous. Oddly enough, let me say that the self symbolically is often depicted as a mandala or a circle, and it represents wholeness in many cases. And oddly enough, the most common symbol that people see when they first begin floating is the mandala, is a circle, is some type of sphere. So in Jungian analysis, we tend images, we tend dreams, we tend visions. We use a process of active imagination where we go to the image and we invite it to dialogue. And I think we can integrate this into flotation tank therapy. So what about soul? What do we mean by soul and psyche? Well, I'm going to throw out a few keywords to help sort of have a feeling tone. Psyche, think of Luna, the feminine, the yin, the moist, the wet. There's our water symbolism. The slow, receptive, reflective. Jung said that psyche is the totality of all psychic processes. Archetypal psychologist, founder of archetypal psychology, Hillman, and I'll introduce him in a moment, said psyche is more of a mode of apprehension, less than a substance. So psyche speaks to us in different languages. She primarily through image, but also through symptoms, through illness. She's symptomatic. Jung said that neurosis is soul's attempt at self-care. He said the gods, I like to shift into personification because I work best with that. Jung said that when we abandoned the gods in their temples, they went underground and they've returned to us in disease. Because we've abandoned these figures within ourselves, the inner life. In the silence and the darkness of Psyche's bath, I think it's a way that we can honor the gods again. We can find our way back as an epistemology of silence to listen to these gods. So going back to why we float and what gods might be in these diseases, anxiety is a big one. There's a lot of research being done. In America, we have the Justin Feinstein, who's doing work at the Brain Institute on anxiety. He just got a grant last year from the National Institute of Mental Health for doing clinical studies. But maybe from a Jungian sensibility, anxiety and panic might be tied to Pan, the god Pan, the nature god Pan, and our departure from nature, and when the reign of rationalism emerged. Eris abandon may return to us as repressed rage and inflammation. Dionysus, ignored, returns as madness. And depression, which relates to Saturn, the astrological Saturn, the heaviness, the leadedness, presses us down and into soul. Soul's realm is down. It's a downward movement. It's in the underworld. So it's a call, instead of to be eradicated by medication, it's a call to soul work. The rational mind is noisy, and we've forgotten how to listen. Jung said that modern noise is a spiritual disorientation of our time. Noise protects us from painful reflection and scatters anxious dreams. I think we fear silence because we truly fear the deep psyche. We're afraid of what might happen. Are we going to fall in? Are we going to get lost? Will we ever be able to come back? What's down there? May a demonic image arise and gestate out of that darkness and chase us. It's terrifying. We don't know what's in there. Before I came on the day I was leaving work, while I was at work, and I had a client who floated in a float pod somewhere else. They had the lights and the music. And then he came to my establishment. No lights, no sound in our tanks. After about 15 minutes, he had to get out. And his heart was racing. He sat on the sofa, and I talked with him. And he said he could not handle the sound of his own heartbeat. Couldn't handle the sound of his own breath. That's quite the tell. Henri Corbin said that the heart is the seat of imagination. Have we forgotten to listen to our hearts? Post-Jungian, maverick, cynics, and father and founder of archetypal psychology, James Hillman, is an incredible text called Revisioning Psychology, where he suggests that we need to take a more polytheistic stance, a Neoplatonic stance toward understanding soul work. I won't have time to go through these, but he suggests 4 movements as a way of soul making. He tells us to see everything with deep imagination. He said the lapis, the philosopher's stone, is immersion into the imaginal. Immersion into the imaginal. So here we have this tank where we can perhaps immerse ourselves both imaginally and literally at the same time. It's sort of a in-between and betwixt liminal space where we can do this work. Hillman popularized the phrase, stick with the image, stick with the image, stick with the image, stick with the image. I can hear him now. So what I call Psyche's bath, the float therapy, when Psyche brings us an image, whether it's a devil or a wise old man, we treat this living image as a living psychic organism. That's critical. Edward Edinger says this living psychic organism has dynamic agency. Jung said it's got autonomy, personality, occasionally a sense of humor. So, to sort of wrap this up as a takeaway, I think Psyche's bath is an invitation to tend living images toward a journey toward wholeness. This research gap is an opportunity to reimagine flotation rest by inviting Jungian, archetypal, and transpersonal fields, our combined fields. We know what to do with what's marginalized. We can take on the marginalized the things that have been cast aside by modernity and the rational side of things, and tend these living images that arise, gestate, and descend into the tank. By doing so, we can honor the gods. So I'd like to close with a short excerpt from a text called Inviting Silence by Gunilla Norris, Universal Principles of Meditation. Within each of us, there is a silence that's as vast as the universe. We are afraid of it, and we long for it. When we experience that silence, we remember who we are, creatures of the stars, created from the birth of galaxies, created from dust and gas, created from the elements, created from time and space, created from silence. Silence reveals. Silence heals. Silence is where God's at, and we yearn to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we have 1 minute for a question or comment.
Yes, thank you for this. I have a more practical question about the setting, how this takes place, how long the sessions are, and if there is some integration work after that, and how the preparation is. So, ask you to speak a little bit about this.
Sure, it's a great question. Flotation, so there's the research side, and that's a clinical setting, and that's completely different than the retail sort of everyday flotation environment. Different establishments treat it differently. What we do where I work is we have about a 15-minute window before we get people ready. You know, we go through any questions. Then they float. The float tanks are different, all of them. And then at the end, if they wish to sit and talk, they can do so. Some people just leave. There's a different place in Tacoma, Washington that has a float center, and they have an array of things for people to do. They have a much larger space, so they have painting and drawing and books and meditation bays and all sorts of other things where people can relax for an hour afterwards. Different establishments have different float times. Some are 45 minutes, some are an hour. Ours are an hour and a half. A big place in Los Angeles, West Los Angeles, does 2-hour sessions. And then there's a place actually in Sacramento that now does overnight full moon floats, which I think are up to 4 to 6 hours, if you can handle it. Yeah.
Thanks a lot again. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.